Okay, so let's dive right in, shall we? Today we're looking at Kay Cronister's The Bog Wife. And knowing your taste for atmospheric, psychologically driven horror, I have a feeling this one will really get under your skin.
Yeah, it's from the get-go, what really grabs you is the setting. This island, desolate, shrouded in mist. Chronister uses it to create this almost unbearable tension that affects not just the characters but seeps out. And you feel it as a reader too. It's like the island itself becomes a character.
More than just a spooky backdrop, then.
Oh, absolutely. It's almost like Chronister gives the island this life. And it's into this incredibly vivid atmosphere that we meet Eleanor, who's returned to the island trying to unravel the mystery of her husband's disappearance. But this isn't your run-of-the-mill missing person case, is it?
No, it doesn't sound like it.
Right from the start, Chronister introduces this ancient myth, the legend of the Bog Wife, this eerie figure who supposedly lures men to their deaths in the bogs. It's really clever how she weaves this unsettling folklore into what could have been a pretty straightforward mystery.
So we have Eleanor dealing with a very real, painful loss, but on top of that, there's this almost supernatural element with the Bog Wife. Makes you wonder how the novella walks that line between what's real and what's myth, right?
That's where the Bog Wife really shines. Chronister blends folklore and psychological horror, but does in a way that makes the Bog Wife more than just some monster in the shadows. She represents something much deeper, embodies Eleanor's internal struggles.
Now, the podcast hosts we're pulling from, they were really intrigued by how this plays out. Especially, they mentioned a scene where Eleanor comes face to face with the Bog Wife. Called it intense, even. What makes this encounter so pivotal?
It's the language Chronister uses in that scene. Very deliberate, almost dreamlike descriptions that make it so you're not sure what's real, what's not. Is the Bog Wife physically there, or is she a manifestation of Eleanor's grief? Her guilt, even.
That uncertainty, that blurring, it just ramps up the psychological tension.
Exactly. And that ambiguity, it even bleeds into the themes of the story, especially when we think about the kind of pressures, the expectations placed upon women. It's as if the island, this myth, they're pushing Eleanor to confront these darker aspects of herself.
Pushed down by the physical island, but also these intangible societal forces almost.
You've hit the nail on the head. The podcast hosts, they were pretty careful not to give too much away, but they hinted that it's this confrontation with the Bog Wife that forces Eleanor to really examine those societal expectations. Makes you wonder, does she buckle under them, or does she find a way to push back?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it makes me think about how women are often portrayed in horror, especially when you're dealing with these, like, folklore figures like the Bog Wife.
It's one of those things, isn't it? Chronister seems to be playing with those classic tropes a little bit, even though at first glance the Bog Wife is this, well, she's fearsome, almost monstrous, right? But she's also got this power, this agency that you don't usually see in those traditional roles for women.
Yeah, that's true. The podcast we're pulling from, they even mention how she commands respect, even though she's feared. Starting to see that duality feed into those themes of female empowerment we were talking about earlier.
Right. The Bog Wife exists outside of all those constraints, the things that society might consider acceptable for a woman. She embraces this wildness. So she might be seen as this figure of fear, but she could also be a symbol of breaking free, liberation from those predefined roles.
The danger and the allure of stepping outside those boundaries almost.
Exactly. And the Bog Wife, what makes it so interesting is how Eleanor's own journey, it kind of mirrors that. When we meet her, she's very much defined by those expectations of a grieving wife.
Trapped not only on this desolate island, but by these invisible forces too, like you said, having to face those expectations head on, just like she eventually has to face the Bog Wife.
That's it. And it's through that confrontation, both literally with the Bog Wife, but also metaphorically, with those societal pressures that she finds the possibility of transformation. Does she give in, or does she find a way to break free?
It sounds like Chronister is using this genre, using horror, to explore these very real, very complex things women deal with.
Absolutely. And the podcast hosts, they were really impressed by the way Chronister uses such vivid language, these sensory descriptions that really put you right there on the island.
Right. They're saying how they could feel how damp it was in the bog, could hear the wind in the reeds. Sounds like she builds this unsettling atmosphere, which probably adds to the psychological tension we keep coming back to.
Without a doubt. That feeling, that unease, it just builds and builds as the story goes on. And speaking of building, the podcast hosts, they hinted at a pretty shocking, pretty unexpected climax. Actually, they said it left them with more questions than answers.
That's always so good, though, right? Especially in a book like this, playing with psychological horror makes you question everything you thought you knew.
Mm.
What do they say about the ending, without spoiling anything, of course?
They were very careful not to give anything away. But they did say the ending makes you look back at the whole story, at the characters, especially Eleanor, in a whole new light. The kind of ending that really sticks with you.
An ending like that, one that makes you want to go back and reread, rethink everything, it's powerful, definitely elevates a story, especially one like this. It's like Chronister's using horror to go deeper, explore those themes we keep coming back to.
Yeah, it's like she gets it, you know? Real horror, a lot of times it comes from inside. The scariest monsters are the ones we create in our own minds, or the ones society kind of pushes on us. Especially if we see the Bog Wife as this representation of those fears and expectations placed on women, like we were saying.
Makes you think, if that's what she stands for, those societal fears,
Yeah.
then what does Eleanor's journey, ambiguous as it might be, say about her own strength, her agency even, by the end of it all?
That's the core of it all, isn't it? What makes the Bog Wife stick with you. And like the podcast host pointed out, you don't get easy answers. Chronister makes you consider these complicated ideas long after you put the book down.
Which, honestly, is refreshing. So much of what's out there these days ties things up in a nice little bow. So much more impactful when you're left grappling with these questions.
100%. The things that make you really think, they rarely give you all the answers, right? They make you work for it, engage with the material.
So wrapping things up here, would you say The Bog Wife is something you'd recommend to someone who likes their horror a little darker, a little more psychological?
For sure. It gets under your skin. This haunting, atmospheric novella that really digs into grief, guilt, and the way those societal forces, especially for women, can shape our lives.
Yeah, if you're looking for something chilling, something that'll stay with you, The Bog Wife comes highly recommended, both from the podcasters and from us in this deep dive.
Couldn't agree more. And on that note, we'll leave you with one last thought. If the Bog Wife is all about those societal expectations women face, then what does Eleanor's fate tell us about the possibility of breaking free from those constraints? Something to think about.
It is chilling, insightful, and something that might resonate even outside the pages of this book. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time as we explore another fascinating topic.